grams of normal plain flour, and then I've got 50 grams of butter and 50 grams of lard. If you want to, you can use all butter or all margarine to make your short crust pastry, but I prefer mine made with either some lard or some white vegetable fat. This needs to be rubbed in with your fingertips until it looks like breadcrumbs. And it's important that you only use your fingertips, not the palms of your hands, as the palms of your hands are hotter and you can end up with a really sticky mixture. So lift the mixture out of the bowl slightly as you start rubbing in, let it fall down a little bit so that it can cool, and if you need to turn your bowl, do it from the inside of the bowl using the back of your hands, and that way you won't make a mess on the worktop. So keep rubbing with thumbs over fingertips until you've got this mixture looking like breadcrumbs. Be careful not to over rub, otherwise it will be difficult to get the water in and make your pastry. When you've rubbed your fat in so that it looks like breadcrumbs, you need to add your water, and it's 1 teaspoon of water for every 25 grams of flour. So as I've got 200 grams of flour, I need 8 teaspoons of water, which I know is the equivalent of 2 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons. So I'm just going to put the water in, and I like to start stirring this with a knife and just see if the mixture will go together to start with. You need to learn to use your own judgment on this, and after you've stirred it a little bit with a knife, you can put your hands in and see if the mixture is actually going to go together. And you need to squeeze through the pastry to make sure that it's not just wet on the outside or dry on the outside and wet in the middle, and that feels to me like it needs a little bit more water. So I'm just going to add 1 more teaspoon to help bring this dough together, and it should all come together into a dough in your bowl, and hopefully you'll be able to leave your bowl looking clean once you've got your pastry made. So there we go, all the pastry is in one ball. The dough looks reasonably clean, so I can move my bowl out of the way, put my dough on the worktop, and I'm just going to knead it very lightly and very quickly before I start to roll it out. And you can see, because it wasn't completely smooth having come out of the bowl, I have a few bits of flour on my worktop which I can just pick up into my ball of pastry and get that ready for rolling. So when I'm ready for rolling, flour your worktop. I'm going to make my lemon meringue pie 1 in a large tin and 1 in a small tin, because I want the small tin for presentation. So I'm going to take a little bit of pastry off to do the small tin, and I'm just going to do the large tin first to show you, because it's easier, I think, to show with a large piece of pastry. Pastry is quite delicate, and because I've got a round tin that I want to put it in, I'm just going to press this into a round to start with. And the best way to roll your pastry is to roll once away from you and give your pastry a quarter turn. So just roll once and then move your pastry on the worktop. And if you move it with your hand flat and just twist, you are much less likely to pick your pastry up and break it. And if you move it every time you have rolled it, you will not stick your pastry to the worktop. So as well as keeping the depth of your pastry nice and even, it won't stick to the worktop. If you notice that your pastry is starting to stick to your rolling pin, rather than drowning it in flour, if you have a bit of flour on your worktop, you can put a little bit on your hand and just rub it over the top of your pastry. If your pastry you think is coming out of a circle shape and not rolling the shape that you want it, you can reshape it with your hands before continuing. And although I have a few cracks around the edge, they're not massive cracks. If the cracks worry you, just pinch the edges together a little bit all the way round and reshape your pastry to a circle. Please don't pick your pastry up with 2 fingers and try and move it. Hold it up and wave it in the air, because the chances are you'll be left with 2 bits of pastry between your fingers and the rest of it on your worktop. The last thing to say about pastry, short crust in particular, is the first time you roll it is the best your pastry will be. So if you struggle to roll it while you're at school, I would ask for help. Do not be tempted to scrunch it up into a ball and roll again. And you can see, because I've turned this every time I've rolled it, my pastry is not stuck to the worktop. To know how big to roll your pastry, put your tin on the top, and you need to have a good, in my case, 2 to 3 centimetres around the outside to know that it will go up the sides of the tin easily as well. So I just need this to be a little bit bigger, and again, it is just 1 roll and turn. Right, I think that pastry will fit in that tin just about. There is more than one way to lift your pastry in a tin. You can lift it in just with your fingers if you want to. So if you have your tin close, what you can do is slide your hands under the pastry, and then you spread your fingers to give as much support as possible, and you can lift your pastry up and put it on top of your tin. If the thought of doing that worries you, or if you think your pastry is cracked, an alternative way is to put your rolling pin in the centre of your pastry, fold your pastry over. You then move your tin to just behind your rolling pin, and you can pick up and allow your pastry to unroll that way. However you get your pastry in your tin, what's really important when you try to fit it is that you do not stretch it. So I'm just going to move mine over so it's a bit more even, which means you lift your pastry and you push it into the bottom of your tin. So hopefully here you can see that the pastry is stretched there and it's curved. If I were to just press this down, I'd make my pastry really thin. So I lift, push it into the edges of the tin, and you do that all the way round. It is lift and push your pastry to the sides of your tin. I've lined the small tin in exactly the same way, and I'm just going to run my rolling pin over the top of these particular tins because I want to clear the excess pastry away from the edge. Some people like to leave all the excess pastry on and cook it with the excess pastry on and then trim that when they're done, but I prefer to have a really neat edge to my pastry, and I like to roll it all off before it goes into the oven. This pastry case needs to be baked blind, which means it's going to be baked without a filling in it. So using a fork, just gently prick the bottom and around the sides of your pastry, and I'm going to do that just a couple of times on the small one as well, and that just helps prevent any big air bubbles from forming in the bottom of the pastry, which you've then got to break. I'm using foil to then support the sides of the pastry before it goes into the oven to be baked blind. You need something to support the sides, because as soon as the pastry gets hot in the oven, the fat in it melts and the sides will collapse. So if you don't support the sides of your pastry, you'll have a really shallow dish to try and get your filling in. And I use foil at home because I don't have baking beans. If you have greaseproof paper and baking beans, that's fine, but both pastries are going to have their sides supported. They're going on a baking tray, and I'm going to give them 15 to 20 minutes to start off with, and then I'll have a look and check and see if the pastry is ready for the foil to come out. Okay, the pastry's been in the oven for 20 minutes, and I can see underneath the foil before I lifted it off that it's starting to go golden brown around the edges. And the same with the little one, it's golden brown around the edges. But when you touch them in the middle here, I can feel that they're just still a little bit soft. So I'm just going to pop them back in the oven for 5 more minutes without the foil in, and then the pastry cases will be cooked and finished, ready for the filling.